ago, and this morning we're in a position now, and you're in a position now to share some of the findings following that survey which you presented to the people of Tobago. What was the most significant results coming from such a survey?
Well, I would say, Keaton, all the things that were responded to, what I found most educating and what we were really looking for, the type of answers we were looking for, is that approximately 88% of the respondents said that they needed more information. So while a great percentage, I think about 94%, said they were familiar, all right, a very passive word. It doesn't say whether you have in-depth knowledge or not, just I'm familiar with, like I've heard it, with the concept of the autonomy drive that, as you put it, has been never ending. For Tobago, 88% said we need more information. All right, so that's the kind of response we were looking for. As you know, our plans really were to begin agitating the Tobago community towards this issue of our greater autonomy, what we call more autonomy, more responsibility, and so forth. And we wanted to get this matter back on the front burner. We know that the bills are sort of languishing there in Parliament. And we want to get this matter back on the front burner for this session of Parliament. Hopefully that we could accomplish it and get this off of the stove altogether and serve that meal to the nation. And so we want to begin forums to agitate conversation, but we didn't know exactly where to really begin, who knew what, and so forth. And so this survey really was put out there to see if we could get a sort of like a benchmark of where to begin, what people knew, what they didn't know, and so forth. And so we felt as though, even though the responses, Keaton, was not as large as we would have wanted to be, it wasn't bad, you know. And to tell the truth, 153 people responding gave us a pretty good snapshot of while we can't say scientifically that this is the view of Tobago, it did give us a snapshot into the Tobago community as to where people may be leaning in terms of their thinking. Mm-hmm. Right? So,
well,
yeah.
I found that most interesting because 51% were females ranging in the ages from 36 to 45 holding postgraduate degrees and living in West Tobago. But what you're suggesting this morning, as you said, it's a snapshot. It's not necessarily scientific as such. But if there is still a great level of unawareness when it comes to autonomy and self-governance, does that, precisely what does that speak to? Does that speak to a lack of political conversations? Does that speak to a lack of self-education and self-awareness? Does it suggest that even though this is an ongoing conversation, Tobagonians still aren't necessarily prepared for autonomy because they simply do not understand what such entails?
Well, it suggests, yes, you're onto something there. It suggests that those who have been in the forefront of leading the conversations, or should be in the forefront of leading the conversations, may not have done as thorough a job as they think they have done in reaching the grassroots. And that's where you have to go with these sort of conversations, Keaton. You have to go down to the grassroots. It's one thing to sit in the upper echelons of circles, and have discussions and political discussions and so forth. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing for you bounce up on the man in the marketplace and you try to have this kind of conversation. And, when you listen to the way they respond to the issue of autonomy, you know that people are really at different ends of the candle when it comes to what autonomy is all about. Some people, really think that it's really about, Tobago just going its merry way, from Trinidad. Just, I can stand on my own 2 feet. I don't need you. Go away, which is tantamount to secession and just so-called independence. I say so-called independence because, truly there's nothing independent in nature. When nature itself is interdependent, there can be no independence within an interdependent platform. So that in and of itself is just a really, mind-boggling to me that we tend to throw around this word independence as if it's real. But back to the future here. So people think it's really about that, and really it isn't. It isn't really. What we're really talking about is really just greater responsibility, affording Tobago that opportunity to sort of grow up in a sense where it can walk on its own 2 feet, but not walk out on the union because it can now walk, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at yourself as someone growing up, let's say in your parents' house, so to speak, right? You come to a point where you learn how to walk. You may even go out and get yourself a little part-time job to bring something into the household and so forth. Take care of yourself, so to speak. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're now positioned to go out and build your own house and leave your parents' house, so to speak. But it could mean that you could probably, on the compound of your parents, you could probably set up something in the back somewhere, something that you could say, this is my own. I can turn my key and come in my door, and so I don't have to respond to a curfew coming into my parents' house, so to speak. But I'm still within the confines of my parents' real estate, so to speak.
Mr. Piggott.
So that kind of arrangement is really what has to happen. But if Tobago never gets off its knees, if it never is afforded the opportunity to grow up and stop crawling on the floor, and just be able to become functional to the union, and that's really what we're looking at, right? Become mm-hmm. functional to the union so that Tobago can now begin earning, right, and bringing something into the coffers of the union. That is not something that one may say, well, we kind of do in a sense because of our boundaries and so forth. That is still something to be debated about and have a conversation on. But I'm talking about actual, going out there and earning, even through our tourism product, our food product, and so forth, our education product.
Mr. Piggott, if I just may interrupt you for a second there. Your analogy in regards to walking on one's 2 feet, it seems as though the attitude based off of the voices coming from the current teaching administration is that they're trying to run before they walk, conversational-wise, in regards to autonomy. But the actions or the inaction suggests that they're not even able to walk on their 2 feet because they're pushing forward with this entire notion of Tobago is being treated unfairly, and they've taken a stance, and there still is great support. But based off of this survey, was there any indication as to whether or not Tobagonians are satisfied with the work of the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary, which, as far as I'm aware, is charged with pushing autonomy for Tobago?
Well, that's another conversation. We're now in the process of working on a next survey there. Are we still there? You still hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, very good. Yeah, we're still in the process of working on the second annual survey of the THA. So that will come, the people response will come there. What is important to note, however, Keaton, in what I'm saying, with the analogy I gave you about the walking and so forth, is that Tobago has the capability, right? It has the capability. It now needs the capacity, right? And that capacity will come in in the increased finance, the increased responsibilities, the sort of loosening of the rope around Tobago's legs so that it can in fact stand up and walk. It does have the capability of walking because, it's not a baby anymore. I mean, you wouldn't expect, a 9-month-old baby or 6-month-old baby. You won't want to have them, attempting to walk, or someone just out of the womb of the mother's womb. You won't want them to try to walk at that point because their legs just aren't there, right? Bones haven't formed properly, ligaments haven't formed properly. Tobago has those features. So it has legs. It has the capability of walking if only it is given the capacity to do that. You see, and that is what the greater autonomy or the greater responsibility is. It's giving Tobago that capacity, give it some increased financing so that it can in fact build out its infrastructure, which can increase productivity, give it the opportunity to develop features. We have a lot of food items here in Tobago that is natural resources that is not being developed, that can be developed to bring in some serious earnings, not only into the Tobago coffers, but into the union. But it needs the capacity to do that, right? The capacity to borrow, for instance, right? And so forth. So that is what's really needed. It's not so much a capability. Tobago can walk. 53% of the respondents said, yes, we are ready for this greater responsibility. We're ready for it, you see. But that readiness now has to come with the assistance from the central government to provide Tobago with that capacity to get up on its legs and begin to move in that direction. And when it begins to move, it's going to be almost like a quantum move. Because the capability have always been there, once it gets up on those legs and central government sort of releases the reins, if you will see Tobago actually sprinting, which is probably where the chief secretary's mind is. It's like he can probably see Tobago sprinting because Tobago can't sprint at this point, but it first needs to get up on those legs and be able to get that forward motion going. And
let me ask you as well, and it's a very
Yes.
important point that you raised at the beginning of the conversation as it relates to the level of awareness or understanding of what autonomy is. So, though 53% of those who responded to this survey said that they are ready, Tobago is ready for autonomy, people do not necessarily know about autonomy and self-governance. They know of autonomy and self-governance. What people who responded to this survey, did they indicate what aspects or what, I suppose, different tenets of autonomy or self-governance they deem as most important, that they think should be prioritized?
Yes, we did have questions along that line. Let me find that. Of course, we talked about are you familiar with the concept of autonomy? And that's where we got the 94%. We talked about, right, in your opinion, which of the following would autonomy self-governance for Tobago mean? And we have some great numbers there where people are talking about the power of the assembly to make laws. That's important, about 44% weighed in on that. More financial power in the hands of the THA. That's 43%. That's a very, very good number. Clear definition of territorial boundaries. That's important to Tobago. While that may not necessarily be something that is redundant to the United Nations, so to speak, it is something that can be defined within the confines of Trinidad and Tobago via an MOU to define those boundaries, because it's useful for Tobagonians and Trinidadians to know what did Tobago actually bring to this union. Right, so when they were forced together by the British, it wasn't really a sort of like a marriage of will. It was more, hey, you're going to marry this person, eh? shotgun wedding, so to speak. But when that union was brought together, what did Tobago bring with it to this particular union? And that has to be respected. Independent institutions free from cabinet directives and oversight, 35% said this. So they're looking for more of a loosening of the reins, so to speak, to give Tobago that more responsibility, that it can manage those affairs so that people don't have to leave Tobago and travel to Trinidad to organize businesses that can be handled right here in Tobago. What our brothers and sisters in Trinidad must understand is, while some people say, well, hey, well, in Trinidad, we have the same problem when someone way down south has to come up to Port of Spain. But yeah, if that has to happen, they can catch a car and go up to Port of Spain, and catch a car and go back home. You understand? With Tobagonians now, we have to catch a plane to go over, we have to catch a boat to go over, and if we miss either of those, or if either of those break down or have some kind of problems, we're stuck in Trinidad. And now we have to expend more money for hotel rooms and all of those things before we can come back home the next day. So the journey from Tobago to Trinidad to organize business is a great hamper to Tobagonian sense of freedom, so to speak, sense of, you know, I'm big enough to manage my own business here in Tobago. I should not have to go to Trinidad to manage these types of businesses. So that's the kind of concept that the average person understands, even though they may not know of the totality of the autonomy drive. Those fine points, you know, the more power to make laws, more money in the hands of the THA, clear definition of territorial boundaries, and independent institutions, or institutions that are government institutions, but they are housed here in Tobago. So I don't have to go to Trinidad to manage those businesses and so forth. So those are the kind of things that people are very much aware of here in the island.
Well, Mr. Piggott, I want to thank you very much for your time this morning, for sharing the findings with us following this particular survey. And I think to add to this conversation is the findings from the second survey of which you are about to undertake, and that is in regards to the thoughts, the perceptions, and even, I suppose, rating the Tobago House of Assembly and the actions or the inactions of Assembly members. So we look forward to that conversation in time to come. But for now, sir, thank you so much.
Keaton, thank you very much for having us, and you have a great day.
You too, sir. It's always a pleasure. Mr. Rodney Piggott, Chairman of the Tobago CivilNet, joining me this morning. Just to, again, share with you some of the statistics found from that survey. 53% of respondents polled in this survey believe that the island is ready for autonomy. 37% disagreed. 65% believe central government has exerted more influence over the affairs of Tobago, while 84% felt the THA should have the greater influence. 44% of respondents believe the THA should have the power to make laws. They felt it was the most important aspect of autonomy. As pointed out by Mr. Piggott, respondents also preferred a federal system of government like the US, with 40% supporting this model as their preferred future relationship between Trinidad and Tobago. And a very important point, the survey found that 94% of respondents were familiar with autonomy. And that word there, of course, the key word is familiar. So still a lot to do in terms of an education drive and that level of awareness. As Mr. Piggott said, it's reaching out to the grassroots. Those are the individuals who matter, especially in this drive for Tobago's autonomy. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a break on the program. And when we return, well, we have more conversations to get into this morning. What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers? Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best.
I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in-depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos. Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays,
only on WASN,
the content capital.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Simon's Musical Supplies Limited. We are the specialist in new and used musical instruments, carrying top brands like Yamaha, Pearl River pianos, vinyl and Sabian cymbals, Remo and Evans drumheads and Fender guitars, just to name a few. Also a wide assortment of music books, pan and accessories. At Simon's, we service what we sell. Trust the leader. Call us now at 625-6412 or visit us at 20 Board Street, Port of Spain.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing on it.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for making the time to be with us this morning. My next guest is a familiar face to the program. We're always grateful that she makes the time to be with us and educating us on a number of health topics. And this morning we're focusing on ovarian cancer. I'm pleased to welcome a specialist in gynecological oncology surgery, always a bit of a tongue twister, Dr. Vanessa Harry. Welcome back to the program, Dr. Harry.
And good morning to all the viewers.
Thank you so much for joining us. Ovarian cancer, it is a terminology of which we've most likely heard of before, but we're not necessarily sure what it is. If you can just give us an explanation of exactly what the disease is.
Yes, ovarian cancer is something that you don't see all the time in the media, you don't hear about it, but it is, for me, a huge issue. It is really a tumor of the ovaries, which are part of the female reproductive system. Women have two ovaries, one on the right, one on the left. And in their reproductive time, this is what produces the follicles, the eggs, which contributes to you getting pregnant. But unfortunately, ovarian cancer is a disease that is becoming more increasingly common, and particularly in the older age group. But as you said, we don't hear about it often enough. And it's a disease that, again, unfortunately, is something quite difficult to pick up too.
Dr. Harry, if it's becoming more and more common, why is it that we're not hearing about it enough? Why aren't there greater drives or education awareness campaigns as there are with other forms of cancer, for example, breast cancer?
Yeah, that's a good question. Breast cancer, first of all, is commoner than ovarian cancer. So worldwide, breast cancer is one of the most common female cancers. Ovarian cancer is a little bit further down the list. That's one. But you're absolutely correct in that there should be more awareness for ovarian cancer. It is a disease that has a worse prognosis. That means the outlook is not as good as it is for breast cancer. And why do we hear a lot about breast? A lot of women do advocate and support this disease because a lot of women do survive this disease. They do very well. They can live a regular, normal life. They live for years and years after diagnosis and treatment. The same cannot always be said for ovarian cancer. Not all women will live for a very long period of time if diagnosed in the advanced stages. So we don't get the awareness, we don't get the support, the funding for ovarian cancer awareness is not always there. It is something that I do try to raise awareness for. And realistically, there are various misconceptions about ovarian cancer. For example, one common misconception I see all the time in the office is that, well, my pap smear was normal, so I can't get ovarian cancer. When a pap smear, which is a very common and a very good test, is a test for cancer of the cervix, which is really the neck of the womb, the mouth of the womb, and has really nothing to do with ovarian cancer. So just having a normal pap smear does not mean anything when it comes to the ovaries or ovarian malignancy.
Dr. Harry, it's incredible what you just mentioned in regards to even the survival rates and the distinction of the disease. And even that mention of already a rumor or a suggestion or a perception is, well, my pap smear was fine, therefore I'm not necessarily suffering from ovarian cancer. What are the signs and symptoms of ovarian cancer that people should be aware of? In fact, at what point should they see a doctor?
Right, so that's one of the biggest problems when it comes to ovarian cancer, and not just here in Trinidad and Tobago. Internationally, ovarian cancer is very difficult to diagnose, particularly in the early stages. So 3/4 of all women, that's up to 75%, even some studies show up to 80% of women will only present when the disease is stage 3 or 4, which means when it's quite advanced and escaped from the ovaries and gone elsewhere. And the reason for that is exactly what we've said. The symptoms and signs are very vague, can be very misleading, so we just don't pick it up early. And some of these symptoms and signs include, it could be just something as simple as feeling very full quickly after you eat, or a change in appetite, or you might find your tummy is bloated, so the clothes are fitting a bit tighter. You might feel a bit nauseous, changes in weight, or it could be totally unrelated. It could be just changes in bowel habits. You might find your urinary system is a little bit different, so you're passing urine more frequently, feeling some pressure. So it can be, the symptoms can be next to nothing, or it could be anything just as simple as feeling very full and your appetite changes. So to pinpoint one specific symptom that the doctor can say, all right, if you have this, it points to ovarian cancer. If you have this, please seek attention quickly. That symptom doesn't exist. So I tell women and warn them, if at all you feel anything different, particularly tummy feeling a bit more bloated, a bit more distended, or you just feel a little bit more unwell, you think your weight is changing, whether losing or gaining, or just something different, that's a time to go in for a checkup. And the majority will be fine, but it's still good to check. And testing for ovarian cancer as well is something that we can't do on a regular basis, to say, let's do a test every 6 months, a blood test, or let's do a test annually to see if we could prevent the disease or pick it up even before symptoms. That type of screening test, such as what you do for mammograms for breast or pap smears for cervix, that type of screening test doesn't really exist with ovarian cancer, unfortunately.
That is, well, again, I suppose it goes back to our first point where you raised the fact of education and awareness is very important, comes back to that point that you're making as well in regards to one particular symptom, one particular sign, and even testing. Are there different forms of ovarian cancer?
Yes, there are. Ovarian cancer comes in several different types. These are different cell types that may dictate differences in treatment, but the broad heading of ovarian cancer remains that the majority of women are women who are a bit older in the menopausal age group. They get that, that type. There is a less common type of ovarian cancer that develops in young women. We don't see that often, but they have similar symptoms. They might have a big ovarian cyst that's detected on an ultrasound scan. But some of the things that might clue you in include, again, older age group, menopausal age group, but also a family history of ovarian cancer or a family history of breast cancer. And some of the symptoms I mentioned before. But generally, if you're feeling unwell and not too sure why, it's just good to have it checked out.
Dr. Harry, do we understand what causes ovarian cancer? What are the possible causes of ovarian cancer?
Good question as well. There is no known direct cause. For example, you could safely say smoking and the substances contained in cigarette smoke contribute to lung cancer, and that's a direct causal relationship. There isn't any such relationship with ovary cancer, but there are indeed risk factors that increase the likelihood of getting cancer of the ovary. And some of these risk factors include being very overweight, not having children, and also women. Yes, that is a risk factor.
Wow.
Yes. Also, having a condition called endometriosis earlier in life has been found to increase the likelihood of ovarian cancer. There are some weak links with fertility treatment and getting ovarian cancer later in life, but that's not fully proven, but it's something we do keep in the back of our minds. So some of these are the risk factors, but yes, not having kids actually does put you at risk of cancer of the ovary. A lot of women ask me, what about the birth control pill? In fact, the birth control pill actually is protective of ovarian cancer. So the oral contraceptive pill or the birth control pill, a very common type of tablet women take, does not cause cancer. And, I should really take this opportunity to reassure women that it really doesn't.
I think, Dr. Harry, if you can just expand a bit on how not having children actually contributes or is a risk factor of ovarian cancer.
Yeah, it's really a theory that has been postulated because the 9 months of pregnancy is protective. Without it, you ovulate every month. That's what women produce an egg every month. And when you get pregnant, you no longer ovulate for those 9 months, but it is thought that those 9 months are protective. Whereas if you have you continue to ovulate every month for years and years and years, it is thought that incessant ovulation can lead to changes in the ovaries, changes in the genetic makeup that can cause cancer. These are theories, but hard to prove, but it is definitely known that not having a pregnancy does increase the risk of ovarian cancer because you go through these many, many, many years of continuously ovulating every month. And that increases the risk of something going wrong with the ovaries, which is why the oral contraceptive pill is thought to be protective, because the oral contraceptive pill, the birth control pill, actually stops you from ovulating and therefore is protective. So that is something we can use with women who have a high risk for ovarian cancer. And how do we identify somebody who's high risk for ovarian cancer? Definitely, for me, a family history. not just of ovary cancer, but family history of breast cancer, particularly diagnosed in the younger age groups. And your first degree relatives, if you find a lot of your relatives were diagnosed with ovarian or breast cancer at a younger age group, it's a good idea to consider genetic testing. For example, the BRCA gene, you know, this is the gene that everybody knows because it's the gene that Angelina Jolie has. And she did a lot to raise awareness of both ovary and breast cancer. So risk factors are important, but the high-risk patient, family history, a genetic abnormality, a BRCA mutation, these are the ones that we tend to image more frequently. We speak to them about possibly preventative surgery and things like that.
Dr. Harry, if someone is able to overcome ovarian cancer, are they still able to have children after that?
So it all depends on the stage of disease, if both ovaries were affected, if one ovary was affected. Unfortunately, the reality is that with ovarian cancer, even in the early stages, the treatment includes a combination of surgery, which includes removing the ovaries, and chemotherapy, and these both affect fertility. So in the grand scheme of things, the majority of ladies who are diagnosed with ovarian cancer do lose their fertility. And, you know, that is a real problem. Very, very unfortunate with ovarian cancer. It's so hard to pick up in the early stages. I mean, to see a really tiny stage 1 tumor, which measures millimeters or centimeters, the ones that I get are really incidental findings. Somebody had their ovaries removed for another reason, and it was really just picked up by a qualified pathologist under the microscope. They didn't even know they had it because there were no symptoms, no tests for it. So stage 1, stage 2 are very rarely picked up in the usual way with symptoms. It tends to be the much more advanced stages, stage 3, stage 4, when women start getting a problem and then they see the doctor. And by that time, when we pick it up, it is pretty advanced and we're heading to definitive surgery that removes both ovaries. We're heading to chemotherapy. So fertility is no longer a realistic option.
Dr. Harry, we are more or less out of time. I'm going to squeeze one more question in. We have to be quick with the response. I know it's possibly a lot, but when a patient is diagnosed with ovarian cancer, what are some of the more important questions that they should be asking their doctor at that stage?
That's a good thing for women to actually be aware of, because sometimes ovary cancer is the furthest thing from a doctor's mind. Not everybody's going to walk into a gynecologist's office and say, I think I have something wrong with my ovaries. They're going to walk into any doctor's office, whether it's your family practitioner, whether it's a general surgeon, a urologist, and say, I'm having some tummy trouble or bowel trouble, passing urine might be difficult, or pressure feelings. And first of all, you know, medical practitioners do need to be aware that it may be a gynecological cause and think of that early on. Women do need to ask, could it be something to do with a gynecological condition? Could it be my ovaries? Should I have an ultrasound scan? I mean, these are very basic things that most doctors will do. But the reality is, you know, some women, the time it takes to diagnose ovarian cancer can be 9 months to a year, because they're going around to different people and get sidetracked with bowel symptoms, get sidetracked with other things, and then finally someone thinks, oh no, let me scan and have a look at the ovaries, and then we pick it up. So even the time to diagnosis is not an instant thing. It could be months, even years sometimes, when the disease is really quite advanced. So it's a very dismal condition.
Dr. Harry, thank you so much for your time this morning. Again, it's always very grateful that you make the time to educate us and make us more aware of such diseases and health and lifestyle on a whole. Thank you so much, Dr. Harry.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having me. Have a good day, everyone.
You too. Always a pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a break on the program.
Here is the WESN News on the Hour. I am Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Tragic incident on Claude Noel Highway claims life of Tobagonian man. A 35-year-old Morva man shot dead. 5 robbery suspects arrested in Morva. Now for the details. Samuel Wilkinson, 58, from Milford Road, Hamden in Lowlands, lost his life on Sunday night while attempting to cross the Claude Noel Highway. The collision, which proved fatal, took place around 7 p.m. near the Gulf City Lowlands Mall. Wilkinson was pronounced dead at the scene after colliding with a Mitsubishi Lancer driven by an individual from Delford traveling eastward. The accident occurred when Wilkinson tried to cross the highway from the north to the south. A shooting in Morva on Sunday night has claimed the life of a 35-year-old man. Queen Alexander of Light Pole 154, Chinapoo Village, Morva, was shot while in the vicinity of Wallace Street in Chinapoo around 8:30 p.m. He was taken to the Port of Spain hospital with a gunshot wound in the chest. However, Alexander succumbed to injuries at 5:20 a.m. on Monday. Investigations are ongoing. 5 suspects are currently in police custody after they were arrested by Northeastern Division officers on Sunday in connection with a reported robbery incident in Northern Division. Police also seized 3 firearms and a quantity of ammunition during separate exercises yesterday. During an exercise yesterday, officers acted on information and proceeded to Pitch Road, Morva. There, they arrested 5 men who fit the description of suspects who were involved in a recent robbery in Northern Division. The officers, on receipt of further information, proceeded to Cipriani Street, Morva, where they searched an open bushy area and found 1 Glock 48 pistol fitted with 1 magazine containing a quantity of 9mm ammunition, 1 Samsung cell phone, and a bunch of keys. Investigations are ongoing. Well, that's it. News on the hour on WESN. I am Sira Ali. Thank you for watching.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us once more this morning. The next conversation actually is quite a debate in modern society. A lot of people have been sharing their thoughts globally. You see it on social media, you see it via forums and panel discussions. But that is in regards to the relevancy of the United Nations. Now, more so in particular, December 10th is the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. This morning we're having a conversation on such, as well as the United Nations relevancy in a modern world, whether or not it actually needs some level of restructuring or revamping, the support for the United Nations. I'm joined by the Executive Director for the Caribbean Center for Human Rights, Ms. Denise Pitcher, a familiar face. Good morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, Keith, and thank you for having us.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning. The declaration has been referred to as groundbreaking, perhaps one of the more important, if not the most important work of the United Nations organization itself. But is that still very much relevant 75 years later on?
I mean, absolutely. The principles, that are in the UDHR, freedom from discrimination, equality, a right to education, right to housing, all of those things, those are things that each and every one of us still wants. The principles that are set forth in the UDHR, speaks to, our being human and what it means to be human and what our needs are. So yes, absolutely still relevant. It still continues to guide so many conventions and treaties and legislation around the world, and that continues to grow and build and advance to and evolve as human rights needs evolve with the context, the changing landscape.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially as much as it really has ideals, it's built upon ideals. Every individual who is born equal and free, regardless of nationality, gender, or ethnicity, it does not necessarily guarantee equality or equity.
So obviously it's a work in progress. When it was founded, it was founded, at the end of the World War II in response to, the barbarous acts that occurred in World War II. And yes, equality is still a work in progress. We do see lots of instances of inequality throughout the world, but that should not prevent us or hinder us from continuing to champion equality. I mean, that's what the UDHR strives for. So yes, I guess we would hope for greater progress with regards to equality, but that should not, in any way hinder us from continuing to strive for equality.
Is it difficult championing something that is not necessarily present, that is very much disputed and debatable?
Definitely, the fight for equality it's not an easy task, and sometimes fighting for human rights and equality is often stunted by other forces at play. National interest, lack of political will, all of those things sort of stunt that fight for equality, mm-hmm. or hinder sometimes.
Well, the resident coordinator for the United Nations in Trinidad and Tobago, Joanna Kazana, she said the time for human rights is now. And that is a profound line. The time for human rights is now. Surely that was, and I know you mentioned it's a work in progress, but surely that was the exact thought process 75 years ago when this declaration has signed. Is it that we are now seeing a regression of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
So definitely, it's a very worrying time. We are seeing the erosion of those fundamental principles in the UDHR. With these numerous conflicts around the world, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in South Sudan, and then that even within the United Nations Security Council, what it seems to be their inability to act in response to these crises. Even next door, what's happening in Venezuela, Venezuela is the largest humanitarian crisis in the world right now, and it's been ongoing now for so many years, and we've seen very limited progress You know, even with migration as well, to what we're observing as well, too, is a lot of states, you know, are working very, very hard to shirk their responsibilities with regards to refugees' rights. There was this Rwanda policy in the United Kingdom, where the United Kingdom government, you know, they were hoping to send asylum seekers to Rwanda, and of course that was struck down in the court. And then now the United Kingdom government, they are now looking to bypass a human rights law to be able to push through a bill so that they can still follow through with this Rwanda policy. And I mean, that's worrying, you know. I mean, that governments are actually, you know, very engaged in trying to undermine human rights.
Mm-hmm. And how much of that is actually reflected in the operations or the works of the United Nations, within the UN that is? Because one might argue that within such a system, the pre-existing system that is, equality, equity doesn't exist. For example, you have 5 permanent members of the United Nations who have veto powers, and that essentially allows them to do as they please without necessarily being held to account, whilst the rest of the membership of the United Nations are called to account, sometimes with severe consequences, even sanctions, should their actions be deemed as unjust.
I mean, the UN Security Council definitely, for decades, you know, there have been calls for reform, and you know, it's easy to say, or I think it's fair to say that how the UN Security Council, works is undemocratic, because it's just a handful of states that tend to dominate, you know, the decisions, those decisions, you know, in the United Nations. However, the UN Security Council is just one aspect of the UN operation. You know, the UN system, the United Nations system, encompasses so many agencies. You know, UN Women, UNHCR, UNDP, UNICEF. And, you know, these agencies, irrespective of what's going on in the UN Security Council, you know, these agencies and their employees, you know, they continue to work tirelessly, put their lives on the line, like what's happening right now in Gaza, where we've seen, I don't know what the count is now, but I think it's over 60 employees, UN employees, have been killed as a consequence of this conflict. And people continue to work in these agencies and continue to put their lives at risk to protect vulnerable people. So yes, UN Security Council definitely, especially in this moment where we are right now, there needs to be some sort of revamping or restructuring or reconstitution. We must not forget all these very important UN agencies who are doing very, very important work, and that work continues to progress.
Mm-hmm. So, and it's a fair point of the other sub-organs of the United Nations. Now, with that, as the moral conduct of societies are constantly evolving, how does the UN actually position itself to ensure that it too is evolving, to work to not necessarily match or define society, but rather help society progress?
I mean, I don't necessarily want to be the spokesperson for the UN, but I mean, just in our own experience, you know, as a small, you know, human rights organization, I mean, there are different mechanisms, you know, through the UN system, where they continue to engage with citizens of different states, you know, civil society, and those consultations or the feedback that they request or they receive, you know, shapes how they do their work. And you know, like when I presented at University of West Indies was it last week or week before last, you know, I encouraged the law students there, you know, to use these mechanisms because they're very, very important mechanisms, you know. The UN Human Rights Committee, where we submit reports, you know, with regards to the covenant on civil and political rights, you know, about each state's implementation of that covenant and how the states are how the state is engaging in activities to meet the human rights standards in those, for example, in the Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. So these mechanisms exist, and and it's important for for people around the world to be aware of these mechanisms and to engage these mechanisms, because they're very, very important, and that shapes how the UN responds to different crises or human rights issues.
So I would agree with you that we can definitely commend the United Nations for a lot of the work that it has done and is continuing to do, even in the facing of global challenges. Would you say that the United Nations is under tremendous pressure, that even we tend to place the United Nations under tremendous pressure? Or is it an organization that was built to face such pressure? It's just not necessarily responding in the way that it should be now.
I mean, definitely the United Nations was founded, to promote peace and security, freedom and human rights and justice, and the rule of law. And so those are, those are issues that, yes, you will face immense pressure, especially when you're dealing with geopolitics, which is what happens at the UN Security Council. I mean, what's happening right now in Gaza is and the slaughter that's happening in Gaza, and the inability of the international community to respond as quickly as they should have demonstrates that pressure and the geopolitics that kind of hamstrings the UN Security Council. So yes, they are. I mean, it is built as an organization to withstand pressure and to deal with pressure. But yeah, we're at a moment now where there needs to be some reflection on how the UN is working. Is it responsive? Is it effective? Is it relevant? It is, but they're definitely, given these major conflicts around the world, there definitely needs to be some sort of reconstitution, and the involvement of other states in making these major decisions on the lives of people.
So, given that we've started this conversation by focusing on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the work that yourself and your organization that it is doing, the environment that is Trinidad and Tobago, have we adopted the ideals or the tenets of the Declaration here in Trinidad and Tobago, or does our domestic legislation not necessarily reflect adopting such declaration?
I mean, every country is a work in progress. I mean, in our constitution, we have our Bill of Rights with the language which reflects a lot of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So that's a good starting point. I mean, for the flaws that we might tend to focus on in Trinidad and Tobago, we do enjoy quite a fair amount of human rights. Our right to education, right to health. I mean, when you compare access to health services in Trinidad and Tobago with what happens, say, for example, in the U.S., where one illness could bankrupt you. Here we have access to a lot of healthcare services, free. Generally, freedom of movement, we're still able to freely move. As opposed to, I would compare again back to what's happening in Gaza, where they can't move. There's no freedom of movement. We still have freedom of expression for the most part. We can go on social media and complain about the government with generally without any sort of backlash. So we do have a lot of freedoms, in Trinidad and Tobago, a lot of human rights we do enjoy. I mean, of course, we still have so many challenges. Access to justice remains a huge issue. Now with the crime levels, our freedom from, our freedom, security concerns are growing. Women's rights are still a major issue with regards to gender-based violence, domestic violence. We still have, just a staggering numbers of child abuse as well too. So it's a work in progress, and that's why organizations like CCHR exist, to continue to champion these causes and fight for equality and fight for human rights. And it's not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. Every country has their own challenges. But as I said, that should not deter us from continuing to fight for equality and for human rights.
Are you seeing strenuous efforts to make improvements to the various areas of which you yourself just mentioned, for example, the justice system, even in regards to women's rights? Are you seeing strenuous efforts domestically?
I think women's rights, there are a number of, organizations like the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, they're there consistently lobbying. I think even within, government officials also, they do champion those rights. The justice system, however, I think, that needs a lot of work, and I think there's so many forces with regards to criminal justice, and that's more of a challenge in terms of access to justice and the criminal justice system. I mean, it seems that the government is trying to adopt some measures to deal with, for example, the delay in access to justice, delay in addressing the delay in the criminal justice system. But there are lots of challenges with regards to the justice system. We still have people on remand for over 10 years. Access to justice, one of the major barriers in access to justice remains lack of finances. So yes, we still have a lot of challenges, but there are efforts. I would say there are efforts, within the government that are championing some of these issues.
So as we conclude this conversation this morning, let's, put it on the table once more. Is the United Nations, very much we commend the work that they've done, and even the work that they are doing now in the face of tremendous pressure. Is it relevant to today's society, or does it need some serious restructuring or revamping?
Well, I mean, I think definitely the UN Security Council and how it functions, that absolutely. And I mean, that's something that's been, echoed for years, is that the UN Security Council, the constitution of the UN Security Council has to change. There's no way that you can have just, 5 permanent members making the decisions that affect the rest of the world, almost 200 countries. So definitely how the UN Security Council functions, because the decisions there impacts, other issues in terms of development, in terms of responses to humanitarian crises, in terms of sanctions against different governments, those kinds of things. And, there's veto power as well to, you can stop decisions. So then there's no progress in terms of some issues because of that veto power as well too. And then of course the geopolitics between Russia and the US, China and US, those things tend to dominate the UN Security Council, and and hinders the response to address these types of major crises that are happening around the world.
Certainly. Well, Ms. Pitcher, thank you so much for joining me on the program this morning, and it's good seeing you once more, and thank you very much for your time and sharing your thoughts and opinions with us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Always a pleasure. Ms. Denise Pitcher, she's the Executive Director of the Caribbean Center for Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, is the United Nations still relevant in 2023? It's a debate. It's a global debate, actually. But as Ms. Pitcher said, we cannot say for a fact that the UN has not achieved anything. We can commend them for the work that they have done in many areas, because they are sub-organs of the United Nations. There's still a lot of downfalls, that is. But is the United Nations actually meeting modern society? Our society is constantly evolving. Well, that's a question for you to answer. Let's take a quick break on the program.
It's Christmas time, and with your family you'll spend every evening watching a movie on WESN. The classics that fill your heart with merriment and cheer as we celebrate together the most wonderful time of the year.
This is my island in December.
This Christmas, WESN celebrates with you as the content capital brings the big screen classics. Gather your family and tune in to WESN from December 1st to 31st at 8 p.m. nightly for We Christmas Movie Classics.
Santa's coming to town. Santa! Oh my God! Santa here? I know him. I know him.
Only on WESN, Content Capital.
My name is Carl Media. I'm the founder and the host of Ever Increasing Voice Ministries. Join me every Saturday and Sunday on WESN, this powerful station, at 9 a.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. nightly. Also on Sundays, I'll be on at 7 a.m., 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. at night time. When you come here, we are getting people heavenly ready.
Thank you very much for coming back with us, ladies and gentlemen. Just before we bid farewell this morning, just to update you on a couple of news items. Last night, the United National Congress actually held a town meeting. She has now revealed that the political leader of the National Transformation Alliance and former Commissioner of Police Gary Griffith has put his inclusion in the opposition's team as part of the crime talks with the government on hold. So therefore, she's now calling on the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, to lead the government team into the discussions. She said Gary Griffith did so, choosing not to be a part of the talks because he didn't want to be scapegoated as a reason for the talks to be scuttled. So, I suppose with all the debate and the conversation that has been had thus far, if the Prime Minister is not going to be a part of the crime talks, Gary Griffith has now taken this position. If the Prime Minister himself is not going to be part of the crime talks, will the opposition still want to have such? I think the opposition's biggest point was the Prime Minister not necessarily including himself. Would he do so now? I suppose the ball is in the Prime Minister's court. The United National Congress has certainly made quite an interesting move there. Gary Griffith himself has made quite an interesting move. So let's see what happens. And then finally, former Trinidad and Tobago Contractors Association President and current contractor Emil Elias is calling on both government and opposition to put their differences aside and create the laws that are required to face the unprecedented crime situation in the country. So he made these comments at the 55th anniversary of the Contractor of the Year Dinner Awards and function on Saturday evening. Now, again, that's an interesting story because there are quite a number of thoughts or notions associated with the contractors in this country and various government entities. Precisely, Emil Elias has now taken that position publicly, but it is often suggested that he is a financier of the People's National Movement and a close friend of the Prime Minister. So him stating this publicly, what does that insinuate? All in all, we can just take it as him being a very good, concerned citizen and expressing his frustrations with the situation here in Trinidad and Tobago. And bear in mind, he's a contractor as well, so he might be directly affected because if by chance, on any of the job sites of which he is working on, he is being extorted for protection, as is with other contractors in TNT, well, that might be a stance as well. Nevertheless, interesting conversations happening here in TNT, ladies and gentlemen. Is it leading to progress? Only time will tell, but you can be certain that AM Prime will have such conversations as it happens. I'm Keaton Shaw, and you've been watching AM Prime on WESN Content Capital, the premier platform for Caribbean content. Wishing you a productive, safe day ahead. And, well, November's coming to an end. We're entering the last step of 2023. Time to do some reflection. Should have started already, but it's not too late. Anyway, folks, I'll see you again tomorrow morning. Until then, keep well.
WESN.
I'm Sean Michael Small, and we are WESN, the content capital.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive. It is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever